Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah. Here we're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and we will be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Nun Aleph Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchas netillas yadayim, and we pick up today at the very top line in the Shulchan Aruch on Nun Aleph Amid Beis, Siman Kuf Nun Tes Sif Yud. Now, before we begin Sif Yud, I think it would be prudent to remind you of two halachas that we learned previously that will have direct bearing on the halacha that we're going to learn here in Sif Yud Aleph, and it's going to present us with a couple of kashas that we're going to have to answer. So, earlier in this siman, in Sif Zayin, we learned a halacha that we've referenced already several times, and that is, if you have a tzinor, you have a channel. Now this tzinor, let's imagine a half pipe, it's open on top, and it's pitched so that the water that enters the tzinor flows down the tzinor. It's intended to irrigate a field. So it's a long tzinor. Now, somebody goes, he takes a bucket, he fills up a bucket of water from the river, and now he brings it to the opening of the tzinor, to the mouth of the tzinor, and he pours the bucket of water out into the tzinor. The water lands in the tzinor, and the water flows downstream. Somebody comes along downstream, far downstream, and he says, oh, look, flowing water. I need to wash for my tuna fish sandwich, and I don't have a keli. He takes his hands, he dunks his hands into the tzinor in an attempt to accomplish netillas yadayim. We learned earlier on in Sif Zayin, the Mechaber told us very clearly that since we paskin that you need koyach gvrã, in Sif Zayin, the Mechaber told us tzarich sheyavayu hamayim mikoyach noisein. The water has to come over your hands mikoyach noisein, from the koyach of a person who's pouring the water. So therefore, said the Mechaber, in this case, the water is not flowing over your hands mikoyach hanoisein. The water is flowing over your hands mikoyach gravity, and therefore you're not yoitze netillas yadayim. We did see that if the person would dunk his hands into the water of the tzinor all the way upstream, very close to where the pour of the bucket falls into the tzinor, then we said you can accomplish the netillas yadayim, because then we look at it as koyach hanoisein. Since you're right next to where the pour lands into the tzinor, you're not right directly under the pour, but you're right next to where the pour lands into the tzinor. That is called koyach gvrã, and it's also called that you got netillas yadayim from a keli, because the water's coming from the bucket is a keli, and you're right there. You're right next to the pour, you're right next to the keli, so it's considered that you have both milas. You have the mila that you got netillas yadayim from a keli, and you also have the mila that you got koyach gvrã. Okay, what's pertinent to us right now is the first part of that halacha, that if the person dunked his hands into the tzinor downstream, far away from the point where the pour lands in the tzinor, then the Mechaber said you're not yoitze. And the reason you're not yoitze netillas yadayim is because you're lacking koyach gvrã, you're lacking koyach hanoisein. The water is flowing onto your hands mikoyach gravity, not mikoyach hanoisein. Okay, so that's one halacha that we have to bear in mind. Then we learned yesterday another halacha. We learned a halacha yesterday. Let's say you have a chavis, you have a barrel that's full of water, and the chavis has a barza. It has a spigot or a faucet near the bottom of the barrel, some kind of a spigot that could be opened and closed. And what you want to do to accomplish the netillas yadayim is you want to open the spigot, which will allow the water to come out, and you want to stick your hand under the spigot, and you want to accomplish the netillas yadayim in that fashion. So the Rabbah told us yesterday at the end of Sif Tes, well, it's not the Ramah, I'm sorry, it's the Mechaber. The Mechaber told us yesterday, near the bottom of Nun Aleph Amud Aleph, im hoisa barza, if the chavis had a faucet, a spigot that could be opened and closed, vehesira, and you open it, or if it's a stopper, hesira, you removed the stopper, v'kibel amayim al yadav, and now you got the water onto your hand, chashiv shapir koyach gvrã. That's called koyach gvrã with a caveat. What's the caveat? V'tzarich lahachzira v'lahasira b'chol shvicha u'shvicha. What you have to do is, you have to remove the stopper, let a glug of water go over your hand, then you got to put the stopper back, then you got to remove the stopper again. So if the water is going in spurts, if the water is going glug, 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 so the water is coming out with interruptions. That's the key word. The water is not flowing out in a steady stream. If the water is coming out with interruptions, so then you have to put the stopper back between each interruption. So a glug of water comes out and then the flow stops for a second. You got to put the stopper back and you got to take it out again. Why? Because by you removing the stopper or opening the faucet, it's only the first glug of water, only the first flow. That's called koach gvrah. That happened because you took the stopper out. The next glug of water, says the mechaber, is not considered koach gvrah. That's already only the kiluach rishon, said the mechaber. In the words of the Mishnah Berurah in Eis Katan Samach Dalid, the Mishnah Berurah said b'chol shvicha u'shvicha pirush b'chol kiluach v'kiluach, which with each flow you need to return the stopper. The loy chashvinan bazeh b'mikoichai el kiluach rishon, because it's only the first spurt of water that is considered koach gvrah. The next one is no longer considered koach gvrah. It would seem that what we're learning over here is that, look, you take out the stopper or you open the faucet and a glug of water comes out. That's your koach. You opened up the faucet and a glug of water came out. Now there's an interruption. The next flow of water that comes out is not your koach. When you opened the faucet or took out the stopper, there was water there waiting to come out. You took the stopper out and a glug of water came out. That's your koach. But then the flow was interrupted. The flow stopped for a second. The next flow of water that comes out is gravity. That's just, now it's open. So now the water is going to keep on coming. So that's already not considered your koach. So for that already, you would have to put the stopper back. So here we have two halachas. We have two different cases where we seem to see that in both cases you're not yotze netillas yadayim because of lack of koach gvrah. We have the case of the tzinar, where a person took a bucket, poured an entire bucket of water into the tzinar. Now the water comes flowing down the tzinar, but since you're far downstream and you stick your hands into the tzinar downstream, even though a person took that bucket of water and poured, so all that water went into the tzinar, mikoach adam. A person took that bucket and poured a bucket of water into the tzinar. So all of that water came into the tzinar, mikoach adam. But since you're far downstream, we don't look at it as koach adam. We don't look at it as koach hanoisein. We look at it as koach gravity that went ahead and had the water flow over your hands. So you're not yotze netillas yadayim because of lack of koach gvrah. So too in the second case of the barza, of the spigot or the faucet. We don't say that when you open up the faucet, so even for the next 48 hours, if the water keeps on flowing out, we don't say it's all koach gvrah. The first kiluach, the first flow of water coming out, that's called koach gvrah. But after that, it's not called koach gvrah anymore. You would have to put the spigot in again. So if you open up the spigot and the water just keeps, glug, 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 we don't say it's endlessly koach gvrah. No, the first spurt of water, that's koach gvrah. After that, it's not koach gvrah. So again, unless you shut the spigot, replace the stopper repeatedly, put it in, take it out, put it in, take it out, put it in, take it out, you don't have everlasting koach gvrah. The koach gvrah is only the kiluach rishon. Now, let's see another halacha here. Siman kufdun tes sif yud. Says the mechaber, Im hita chavis malei amayim. If you take a big barrel of water and you tip it over onto its side, and there's a little opening. It's not that the top of the bucket is open. There's a small opening in the top of the bucket. So you take this big barrel of water and you tip it over on its side. Now the water is going to flow out. And if it's a big barrel and it's a small opening, it might take a long time for all the water to leak out. So, if you tip onto its side a barrel full of water, and then you sit down in the park to take in the sun. You want to chazer the daf, so you sit down off to the side and you chazer 5 blot. So you're sitting there for an hour. And the barrel has water pouring out of it all day. But why? Because you laid it on its side. You took the barrel, you laid it on its side. That's kayach adam. You took the barrel, you laid it on its side. Now the water flows out all day. And says the mechaber, v'notal yadav bimenu. And now 2 hours, 3 hours later, you go stick your hands under the flow in order to accomplish netillas yadayim. Also like netillah. You accomplished netillas yadayim. So the herst, what's happening over here? You took a barrel, you laid the barrel on its side. 3 hours later, you stick your hands under the water. The mechaber says you accomplished netillas yadayim. Apparently, in this case, it's considered kayach hanoisen. In this case, it's considered kayach gvrã. It's kind of like an everlasting kayach gvrã. You lay down the barrel at 11 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the water is still running out. You could come and you could stick your hands under the flow of water, and it's called kayach gvrã because 11 o'clock in the morning you laid the barrel down. So obviously, we're going to have to balance this against the halacha of the tzinar. Again, in the halacha of the tzinar, a person took the bucket of water and poured it into the tzinar. All the water went into the tzinar mikayach adam. And yet we say that, no, you stick your hands into the tzinar downstream. That's not called kayach adam. Sorry, kayach gvrã is gone. Kayach gvrã is only if you stick your hands into the tzinar right next to the pour. But you go downstream, it's not considered kayach gvrã. The kayach gvrã expired. So somehow in that case, the kayach gvrã expired. So too by the barza. You open up the barza and the water comes flowing out. It's not an everlasting kayach gvrã because you opened the barza. You can't open the barza 11 o'clock in the morning, come back 4 o'clock in the afternoon and wash your hands. Why? Somehow the kayach gvrã over there expires also. But in this case, when you take the barrel and you lay it down on its side, the kayach gvrã does not expire. You can come back 5 hours later, stick your hands under the water, and you still have kayach gvrã. So we're going to have to answer this. And the Mishnah Berurah, of course, is going to bavar in this kasha. The Mishnah Berurah is going to ask this kasha, and the Mishnah Berurah is going to give a teretz. We're going to have to understand what the Mishnah Berurah's teretz is. But the Mishnah Berurah gives a teretz. So let's take a look. First, says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton samachei. Imhita. If you took a barrel and you laid it down on its side. First of all, this doesn't have to be you. It doesn't have to be that you laid the barrel on its side and you came at 4 o'clock in the morning to wash for your tuna fish sandwich. No, it could be that Ruvain laid the barrel on its side and Shimon is washing the netillas yadayim. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be the same person. And it could be that Ruvain, who put the barrel on its side, he had no kavana at all for netillas yadayim. He wanted to drain the barrel. For whatever reason, he wanted to drain the barrel. He was worried about mosquitoes propagating in the barrel, so he wanted to drain the barrel, public service. So he turned the barrel over on its side. Now Shimon comes 5 hours later, and he has kavana for netillas yadayim. He sticks his hands under the water for netillas yadayim. It's good, because the bottom line is, the water is coming out mikayach hanoisen. A person laid the barrel on its side. Afilu haki shaper dami. Kevin the adam noitel yadav achakach l'shem netila. As long as Shimon sticks his hand under the water with kavana for netillas yadayim, I don't need Ruvain to lay the barrel down with kavana l'shem netillas yadayim. The bottom line is, I have Shimon washing his hands with kavana for netillas yadayim, and that water is coming out mikayach hanoisen because Ruvain, a person, laid the barrel down. So I have kayach hanoisen and I have kavana for netillas yadayim on the part of Shimon. Everything is okay. I feel lucky shaper dummy. Kevin the adam anoitel yadav achakach kiven l'shem netila. Uchemavor lekavan b'sif yud gimel the bekavanas noisein oy noitel sagi. We're going to learn later on in Sif Yud Gimel that you need kavana on one side. Either the person pouring the water has to have kavana for the netillas yadayim. So if Shimon sticks out his hands and Ruvain pours the water over Shimon's hands, if Ruvain had kavana for the netillas yadayim and Shimon didn't, that works. Or the opposite case, Shimon sticks out his hands, and he has kavana for netillas yadayim. Ruvain has no kavana for netillas yadayim at all. That also works. So too in this case, says the Mishnah Berurah, it would be fine. Now let's see Ois Katan Samach Vav. Ois Katan Samach Vav is what speaks to the kasha that we had, and the Mishnah Berurah is going to answer part of our kasha, but the Mishnah Berurah is not going to answer the entire kasha. So let's take a look what the Mishnah Berurah says. Says the Chavetz Chaim. We're learning over here that Ruvain could lay the barrel on its side at 11 o'clock in the morning, and then either Ruvain or Shimon or Levi could come back at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, stick their hands under the flow of water, and they could accomplish the netillas yadayim because the barrel was laid down by Ruvain at 11 o'clock in the morning. So you have koyach hanoisein, and the koyach hanoisein does not expire, even 5 hours later. Says the Mishnah Berurah right away, he bavarns one of our kashas. He says, this is not similar to what we learned yesterday in Sif Tes, where we learned by the Barza, the koyach gavra nechshav rak hakiluach rishon levad. By the Barza, we said that koyach gavra only extends to the first glug of water, and it expires after the first glug of water. And over here, that's not the case. So, why not? What's the difference between Sif Tes and Sif Yud? Says the Mishnah Berurah like this. First he says, it's not similar to Sif Tes, the koyach gavra nechshav rak hakiluach rishon levad, umitam zeh. And since koyach gavra only extends to the first flow of water, tzarich lahachzira b'chol shvicha u'shvicha. Therefore, we have to close the faucet or replace the stopper between each pour. It's not similar. Why isn't it similar? Says the Mishnah Berurah, and he brings this down from the Lavush and from the Magen Avram, and he says other achrayim as well. He makes a very interesting chilik. He says the Hassam over there in Sif Tes by the case of the Barza, loy asa maisa beguf hamayim. By the Barza, you didn't do anything to the water. You have a 50-gallon drum with 50 gallons of water in it. What are you doing? What's the maisa that you're doing? The maisa that you're doing is you're opening the spigot. There's a valve that is holding the water back inside the 50-gallon drum. By you opening the valve, you're doing a maisa that allows water to flow out. You're not doing anything to the water. You're not changing the position of the water. You're not doing anything at all to the water. What you're doing is you're opening up a gate that was holding the water back. That maisa that you do by opening up the gate, that koyach gavra only extends to the first flow of water that comes out, says the Chavetz Chaim in the name of the achrayim. There was a flow of water that was standing right by the gate, right by the valve, ready to come out. Your koyach gavra of opening the valve, that allowed that water to come out. But that only allowed that water to come out. The fact that more water is going to come out after that, say the achrayim, that's already gravity. That's already not your koyach gavra. Your koyach gavra is the water that was oimid, the water that was there, that was ready to come out. By you opening the gate, you let that water out. So that first flow, that's koyach gavra. And this is easier to understand if you understand that it's coming out in spurts, in interrupted spurts. So the first spurt that came out, that's considered koyach gavra. But now there was an interruption, and now the second spurt, we look at it that your koyach gavra of opening the faucet, what, that koyach gavra, 3 days later, we're going to say that the faucet, that the water is flowing because of you? No, the water is flowing now because the barrel is opened. The valve is open, so the water keeps on flowing. But we don't look at all the water that flows out for the next 48 hours as being your koyach gavra. That's over there in Sif Tes. The hasam lo yasam ma'isa beguf hamayim. Over there, you didn't do anything to the water. V'rak sheheser abarza haminea hamayim lotzes. All you did is you took away the stopper. You opened up the gate that was holding the water back from coming out. V'lachein, and therefore, loichoshev ba mikaychai, for this reason we only consider it kayach hanoisein, rak kiluach harishain ayoytze miyad kishapeseach. We only look at it that the first flow, you open it and a flow comes out, that's kayach hanoisein. That's your kayach. You open it and a flow comes out. What comes out later is because it's opened. It's open, so water keeps on coming. But that's not considered kayach hanoisein. Aval hacha, but here in our case, where you take the barrel and you lay the barrel down, aval hacha she'asa ma'aseh beguf hamayim, now you're doing something to the water. Shehinia oisam, you moved all the water. You took the whole barrel full of water and you turned the whole barrel on its side. You made a very significant change in the water. You changed the position of the water. When the barrel was in the upright position, the water couldn't flow out. But now that when you took the barrel and you laid the barrel on its side, by laying the barrel on its side, you moved all of the water in the barrel, and you put all the water in the barrel into position to come out. Well, now, that's a kayach adam that doesn't expire. You know why it doesn't expire? Because even 5 hours later, the water that's flowing out 5 hours later is flowing out because of a maisa that you did to that water. The water that comes out 24 hours later is not flowing out because of you opened the barza 5 hours ago, memela the water flows out. No, this water that comes out 5 hours later, you did a maisa to that water. You moved that water and you put it into position to flow out. So that's a non-expiring kayach hanoisein. You did something to that water. Masha Enkein by the barza, you open up a barza at 11 o'clock. Did you do anything to the water that's in the upper level of the barrel? Did you do anything to the water that's going to flow out of the valve 5 hours later? No, you didn't. You didn't do anything to it. You didn't change its position. You didn't do a thing to that water. You opened the barza. Now, opening the barza had the direct effect that the first flow that was ready to flow out, that was standing by the valve, you opened the gate, it came out. That's considered kayach. That's considered kayach adam. But the water that flows out 5 hours later, your kayach already expired. Over here, you did a maisa to that water that's going to flow out 5 hours later. That kayach adam doesn't expire, says the Mishnah Berurah. Let's read it inside. Aval hacha she'asa maisa beguf hamayim. Over here, where you did something to the water, shehinia oisam, you moved the water, umakmas hatayasoy nishpachen, and because you moved it and you put it into a different position, it's going to flow out. So calls man sheshayvchin me'achaviyos pikiluach la'olam chashabami kaychay. As long as the water flows out, it's all going to be considered mikaychay. So the Mishnah Berurah has beautifully answered the kasha that we had from Siftes. In Siftes, the kayach expires after the kiluach harishon because you didn't do anything to the water. Over here in Sif Yud, the kayach doesn't expire because you moved all the water. But how about the kasha from the tzinar? How about the kasha from Sif Zayin? In Sif Zayin we learned, let's imagine, you take a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket, you fill it up from the river, you've got 5 gallons of water. You go over to the tzinar, you pour all 5 gallons of water from the bucket into the tzinar. Did you do a maisa with the water? Yeah, you did a maisa with all 5 gallons of water. All 5 gallons land in the tzinar and run downstream in the tzinar. If somebody comes downstream and sticks his hand into the tzinar, he's not yotzei netillas yadayim. Why, said the mechaber? Because there's no kayach hanoisein. Why not? I did a maisa beguf hamayim. All of the water that was in the bucket is flowing downstream because I put it into the tzinar. So why does the kayach adam expire? Why does it expire? Let it flow a mile downstream. It still shouldn't expire. It still should be kayach hanoisein. So I was puzzling over this, and then I saw that there's a Dirshu footnote. There's Dirshu footnote number 67. And in Dirshu footnote number 67, they bring down this kasha, and it seems that Rav Gifter, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, had this kasha. Now, I'm not going to read the words that they have over here in the Dirshu, because I don't know if these words are directly taken out from Rav Gifter. I don't know if these are Rav Gifter's words, or it's paraphrased over here in the Dirshu, which the Dirshu does all the time. So I don't know, and I'm not convinced somehow that these are Rav Gifter's actual words. But I was reading I was trying to discern from the words that they present here as Rav Gifter's, what he tries to make a chiluk. I was trying to understand what the chiluk is. And I was having difficulty with it. So the truth is, I picked up the phone and I called my brother, Yisroel Weiss, a tremendous Talmid Chacham, and I was talking it over with him. And the way we came to understand, I think what Reb Gifter is trying to say is like this. He's saying like this: by our case here in Sif Yud, when you take the barrel and you lay the barrel down on its side, so it's like I said, you did a ma'aseh beguf hamayim. You put all the mayim in the barrel into a position where it's going to flow out, and it's continuously flowing. It's going to flow out. So the water that flows out 5 hours later is flowing out from your koyach, because you put it into that position to flow out. So that koyach adam doesn't expire. By the tzinor, yes, it's true. A person took all 5 gallons of water and poured all 5 gallons of water into the tzinor. But now, why is that water flowing downstream? Is that water flowing downstream because of your pour from the bucket? By the barrel, when you lay it down on its side, the reason the water is flowing out of the bucket is because of the position that you put the water into. You took the water that was in the barrel was vertical, you put it in the horizontal, and now it's all going to come out of the barrel. That's called your koyach. But in the tzinor, what you did was, you took all the water from the bucket, and you repositioned it into a tzinor. Now, why is it flowing downstream? It's flowing downstream because it is in a tzinor. The tzinor is what's making it flow downstream. It's in a channel that is pitched downward. So the tzinor is making the water flow. In the barrel, it's not the barrel that's making the water flow. I'll give you a raya. The water was in the barrel and it wasn't flowing as long as the barrel was vertical. Now you took the barrel and you put the barrel in the horizontal. You did that. You moved the water. So now the water flows out and that koyach adam never expires. But by the person who poured the water into the tzinor, his koyach transferred the water from the bucket to the tzinor. Now that it's in a tzinor which is pitched downward, gravity is going to make it flow downstream. But that's not a continuous koyach of the adam. The adam, his koyach, transferred it from the bucket to the tzinor. So if you put your hand in right where he transferred it to the tzinor, that's koyach adam. But you go and you put it in 200 feet downstream, that's the koyach of the tzinor. The tzinor was kind of the mayim. By the barrel, it's not that way. There's nothing after the barrel. There's the barrel. You repositioned the water in the barrel, it's going to flow out. And it's going to continue to flow because of your koyach. By the tzinor, it's the tzinor that's making it flow. The tzinor is kind of the mayim. Now the tzinor has the mayim, and the downstream pitch of the tzinor is going to make it flow. So here we have the teretz to the kasha from Sif Zayin from the case of the tzinor. Okay. In this case, also like netillas, says the Mishnah Berurah, Ayin b'bir halacha. Take a look at the bir halacha, dibra maskal also. Shetoiv lahakma b'zel lechatchila. After all is said and done, and after all the dust settles, the bir halacha says, the Chavetz Chaim says in the bir halacha, that even though this is true, that if a person laid the barrel on its side, you could come back 5 hours later and wash the netillas yadayim from the flow of the barrel, toiv lahachmir, it would be better to be machmir, not to wash the netillas yadayim in this fashion. Second line down in the Shulchan Aruch, the Aleph Amud Beis, if Yud Aleph, says the Mechaber, Hakoil kisherim litein mayim liyadayim. Everybody is kosher to pour water onto somebody else's hands to accomplish the netillas yadayim. Afilu cheirishayta v'katan. Even people who we assume do not have complete das, they're not considered to be a bar das, like a cheirish, a deaf mute, a shaita, somebody who's mentally deficient, the katan, or a minor, they're not considered to be a bardas, to be able to accomplish things in halacha. Still, they could pour water onto your hands in order to accomplish the netillas yadayim. Also, ovid gilulim, somebody who's ovid avodah zara, venida, or a woman who's a nida. And the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain what the chiddush over here is in ovid gilulim and nida. Ve'eka manda amar, and the Ramah says there is one who says the katan pachas bi ben sheish. If you have a minor child less than 6 years old, dinoi kikoif, he has the halacha of a monkey, which we're going to see very shortly. Says the Mishnah Berurah, they're never considered to be bardas, and that's why there's a chiddush that even though they don't have das, they could pour water onto your hands for the point of the netillas yadayim. What's the chiddush? Says the Mishnah Berurah, after benoitel yadayim litruma, let's say beheri yibana hamigdash. Let's say we had the Beis Hamikdash and everything else, and we're keeping all the halachas of Tumah and Tahara, and we're keeping the halachas of Truma, and we're giving Truma to a Kayin so that a Truma could eat, so that a Kayin could eat Truma. He has to eat the Truma with Tahara, right? We have to keep Truma Tahar. So let's say somebody had Stam Yadayim. Stam Yadayim Ashniyos. If he touches Truma with Stam Yadayim, he passels the Truma, because by Truma there's a Shlishi, right? So now he has to wash the netillas yadayim. In that case, could he allow a nida to pour water onto his hands? Could he allow an ovid avodah zara to pour water onto his hands? No. You know why? Because if a nida picks up mayim, that mayim becomes tamei b'masa. If a nida who's tamei picks up water, that water contracts tumah. Now she's going to take tamei water and pour it onto your stam yadayim. She can't be matahar your hands with that water. If you would touch truma, you would make the truma apostle. So too, an ovid avodah zara, the chachamim were masakin that an ovid avodah zara has the same level of tumah as a nida. So if an ovid avodah zara would pour water on your hands, he couldn't be matahar your hands for truma. So that's why there's a chiddush over here that for the netillas yadayim, a nida or an ovid avodah zara could pour water on your hands. Even though if we really were keeping the halachas of tumah and tahara, this wouldn't work. So again, says the Mishnah Berurah, after benoitel yadayim the truma asra yadayim, even though if you were really washing your hands to protect truma, it would be asr to have these people pour water on your hands. Because they make the water tameh when they carry it. Nida midaraisa. By nida, this is a din daraisa. V'idach, and by an ovid avodah zara, by the other case, chachamim gazer aleim tuma. The chachamim were geyser tuma on an ovid avodah zara. B'netila l'chulin like gazru. But over here, where we're washing netillas yadayim al hapas, which is only a din derabanan, we don't have this gzera, and therefore you can have a nida or an ovid avodah zara pour the water onto your hands. And then there's another reason. And there are those that say, Mishum de bizmanenu tamid kalamayim tamein. Nowadays all water is tamei. Shekulanu tamei mesim. Because we're all considered to be tamei meis. We don't have mei paraduma. So we're all considered to be tamei meis. So nowadays, it's not really tamei and tahara. We're doing this mishum srach truma. We're doing it mishum meheri yibana amigdash. But we're not really dealing with the dinim of Tumah and Tahara nowadays, because we're all tummy anyway, and all the mayim is tummy. So therefore, it's okay to have the mayim poured onto your hands by a nida or an ovid avodah zara. Yet, the kasra achrayim, the achrayim, right? The Mishnah Berurah says that lechatchila it's better not to have a nida or an Ovid Avodah Zarah pour the water onto your hands. If you take a look in the Dirshu, in footnote number 69, they bring down over here from the Chazon Ish, Shaloi Motzinu Misha Machmer Bazeh. We don't find anybody who's machmer on this. And the Chazon Ish says it's a davar pashut. You can't be machmer on this. How would a nida wash the netillas yadayim? Nida herself, she picks up the cup, she's v'tami the mayim, she pours it onto her hands. She's pouring tummy water onto her hands. So what? And she can't have another woman who's in need to pour the water onto her. She's also tummy. So she has to find somebody who's tar. Meantime, there is nobody who's tar. We're all tummy mace. So the Chazon Ish says nobody is machmer on this. Ice cut and ayin, the Ramah said that there are those that say that a minor child under the end of 6, dinoi kikaif, he has the halacha of a monkey. What does that mean? We're going to learn the halacha. Can you use a monkey? A trained monkey? Could you have a monkey pick up a washing cup and pour water onto your hands? So there are those that say that a child under 6, a minor child under bar mitzvah, is halachically not a bardas. But a child under 6 is not just not a bardas. There are those that say that a child under 6 already doesn't have a din of koach gvrã. He's not considered a gvrã in the context of hilchos netillas yadayim. So says the Mishnah Berurah Katnayin, dinoi kikaif, he has a halacha of a monkey. We're not denigrating the child and calling him a monkey. Dinoi kikaif abuvur lekamei, he has the same halachic status in the context of the netillas yadayim as the din of a monkey, which is explained later in Sif Yud Beis. The yesh paislan boy. There are those that say that a trained monkey, you don't accomplish the netillas yadayim if a trained monkey pours the water on your hands. Because a child under 6 is considered not a bardas at all. From the Gvrã, the Chavetz Chaim says it's mashma that we do not need to be machmer. And it's not similar to a monkey, where we can't wash the netillas yadayim from a monkey. The lav adam hu. Because a monkey is not a human. It's b'chlam not adam. V'les kan koach gvrã. So you can't say that there's koach gvrã, you can't say that there's koach adam by a monkey. He's not an adam. But a minor child under sheish is a human. So there could be koach adam. He's not worse than a shaita. A shaita is mentally deficient, but he could pour the water onto your hands because there's koach gvrã. He's a gvrã, he's an adam. So too by a child under 6. You're right. He's not a bardas. And he's not a bardas at all. He's less of a bardas than a 9-year-old. But he's still an adam. So there's still koach gvrã. Okay, now we go to Sif Yud Beis. Says the Mechaber, im hakoif, if a monkey. Pirish, says the Ramah, min chaya, a type of animal, simiya balaz, a simian. A monkey is a simian. So, im hakoif, if a monkey, pirish, min chaya, simiya balaz, noisin mayim liyadayim. You've got a pet monkey, believe it or not. I've met somebody who has a pet monkey. You have a pet monkey, and he is able, he's trained, that he could take a cup of water and pour it on your hands. So im hakoif pirish ben chaya simya balaz noisin mayim liyadayim yesh paislim. There are those that say that it's not good because it's not an adam. V'yesh machshirim, but there are those that say that it's okay. And the Mechaber says v'nirin devreim, and their words that it's okay appear to be correct. U'mikarmakim, nevertheless, says the Ramah, yesh lahachmir, we should be machmir. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katnayin min chaya v'yesh baktsas das letashmish. This type of chaya, this monkey, has a certain amount of das that it could be trained to work for a person. I once heard this story about a couple of chassidim who came up with a very cute chap. It seems that picking coconuts is tough work. You got to climb up the palm trees, pick the coconuts, and throw them down. So people were using very unskilled laborers to go climb up the trees and pull the coconuts and throw them down, and you weren't dealing with the best of chevra, and therefore fights would break out, and there were drug abusers, and this and that, endless problems with the employees. So these two chevra got together, and they figured out how to train monkeys to go climb the tree, pick the coconuts, and throw them down into a barrel. And guess what? You don't have to pay monkeys minimum wage. You just give them a banana, and they're very, very happy. So they figured out how to get monkeys to do the work of picking the coconuts. So the Mishnah Berurah says over here that the monkeys, yesh bak tzas das l'tashmish, they could be trained to serve you. So if you have a monkey and you train the monkey to pour water on your hands, that's why we have a shaila. Could you do that for netillas yadayim? So the Mechaber said yesh poislin, says the Mishnah Berurah base, they can't koyach gavra, because a monkey is not human. So there's no koyach adam, there's no koyach gavra. But ayin gimel yesh makshirin, there are those that say it's okay. Sfir lahu, they hold deloy be'inan sheyavar yadav rak mikoyach noisein. You don't need koyach adam. You don't need koyach gavra. You need koyach noisein. You need that it came through the koyach of whoever did the pouring. I don't care if it's a human or a simian. Doesn't matter. Oiskalayin dalid. The Ramah said yesh lahachmer. We should be machmer. Ubedievet kosher. B'diavad, if the monkey did pour the water on your hands, b'diavad it's kosher. Magen Avram, ubel Yerabah kosav degam b'diavad yachsav yitabel bracha. The Yerabah says even b'diavad you should go wash again, albeit without a bracha. Elodim ein lemayim yesh lismach al netilazu. But if you don't have any water, you could be soimech on this netillas yadayim. Okay, we have a little more time. Let's do Sif Yud Gimel. Let's get in some extra zechusim over here before Yom Adin. This is the final shir before Yom Adin. Let's get in some extra koyach HaTorah, some extra schar of limud HaTorah, which is the most potent schar that we could possibly get. Every ois v'ois of Torah is such tremendous schar that we're getting. It's why I end every shir and I say the zechus of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. Such tremendous zechusim that we're getting in Shemayim from limud HaTorah. Let's go another few lines weiter. Says the Mechaber if you gimel 3 lines off the bottom. Ulechatchila, yechavein hanoitel lenetila hamachsheres laachila. Lechatchila, says the Mechaber, the noitel, the one who is washing netillas yadayim, should have kavana, he should have intent that he is washing to accomplish a washing that is machsheres la'achila, that prepares him to be allowed to be kaveh suda alapas. Says the Ramah, v'kavanas noisei nami moyel afilu lechatchila. If you don't have the kavana of the noitel, if the one who's washing doesn't have kavana, lechatchila he should, if he doesn't, but the one who's pouring the water onto his hands does have kavana, that is just as potent lechatchila. So there are 2 lechatchila scenarios. Lechatchila scenario number 1, and we're talking about a case where Shimon is the one who's washing netillas yadayim, but Ruvain is pouring the water onto his hands. There's 2 lechatchila scenarios. Lechatchila scenario number 1 is that the noitel, Ruvain, has kavana for netillas yadayim. And Shimon, who's pouring the water onto his hands, he has no kavana. His kavana is to serve Ruvain. He's Ruvain's manservant. So he has kavana to serve Ruvain. But he doesn't have kavana for the netillas yadayim. But Ruvain had kavana for the netillas yadayim. That's lechatchila. The other lechatchila scenario is the opposite. Shimon had kavana to pour the water onto Ruvain's hands with kavana for the netillas yadayim. But Ruvain, who's getting his hands washed, he had no kavana at all. His mind is on the stock market. So he didn't have kavana at all. That's also lechatchila, says the Ramah. Says, let's go weiter. Afilu shaloi kiven aneitel klal. If the one who poured the water onto the hands had kavana, but the one who got his hands washed didn't have any kavana at all, that's also lechatchila, says the Ramah. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut in ayin hey, lechatchila yechavi. V'amagen Avram kasav, the Magen Avram writes, lift soil af b'diavad, to pass on netillas yadayim, even b'diavad, im loy kivnu klal, if there was no kavana, ayin sham. Aval agra b'kufnun chesiv zayin hiskim ka'asovrim, the beloy kavana kosher. The gra is maskim that if there's no kavana at all, b'diavad it's kosher. V'cheinu das roiv rishonim. But b'diavad bevada yesh lahakol. B'diavad definitely you could be makel b'she'en loy mayim lital shenis kedasa b'chaber. If you don't have any other water to wash with a second time, you definitely could be makel, like the opinion of the mechaber. Achakach batzasi shekei kasa b'mayim mardechai. Ois kat nine vav. The Rama said v'kavanas noisein. The kavana of the one pouring the mayim is effective lechatchila the same way as the kavana of the one who's getting his hands washed. If the one pouring the water is a minor child less than 6, that his intent is worthless. So if the one who's getting his hands washed had no kavana, and the 4-year-old who poured water onto his hands had kavana, that kavana is worthless. So this would be a netillas yadayim without kavana at all. Okay, we're going to stop over here. The zechus of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Ransham should send Yeshuas, Refuas, Parnasa, and Shidduchim to all those in need. Everyone should have a k'siva, v'chasima, Tova. I want to give a personal yashakayach to all of the listeners that give me the great zechus of being able to sit down every day and teach Torah. And not only is it a zechus that I get to teach Torah, but it also generates another zechus because it makes me sit down and prepare the share to give. So you're also generating the zechusim of my limud HaTorah. So you have a hand in that zechus as well. So I want to give really, really, really a deep, heartfelt yashakayach to all of the listeners. Everyone should have a k'siva, v'chasima, Tova, should have a year of gesund and parnasa and nachas and everything wonderful, and we should be zechus finally to see the bias goyel tzedek b'mehera v'yameinu amen. Be well.